Call this meeting to order. It's the Land Use Committee meeting Tuesday, February 21st, 2017. And again, welcome to everybody out there in TV land as well as the individuals here this afternoon. Our first business is approval of minutes. Could I have a motion to approve, please?
I'll move to approve the minutes of Tuesday, January 10th, 2017.
Second.
Second by Councilor Marshall. Selberg, thank you very much. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay, the one and only report, and technically it is an update from our previous meeting, is on ADA compliance, and Shannon Verhey, Assistant City Engineer, will conduct a short presentation followed by questions. Shannon, thank you for being here.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for letting me speak here today on this beautiful day. I know you'd probably all rather be outside enjoying the weather and getting this update, but we're coming back here today to give you an update on the accessible sidewalk design standards as well as the ordinances. There were some questions that came up after the last land use, so instead of going to informational or city council, we decided let's come back and let's make sure we address all the questions in land use before we move forward. So. Today I also have Wes Phillips, our principal street engineer, in the audience, as well as Colleen Moran is here, one of our assistant city attorneys, who can help me with any questions. And then we also have Todd Anowski from the Home Builders Association here. We've worked a lot with Todd on kind of communication, education strategies, and he can answer any questions that you may have for him to speak on behalf of the Home Builders Association. So I'm just going to go through a few slides again, just kind of the background of what we talked about last time, just kind of refresh everybody's memory. And basically, you know, we're here, we need to make sure that the city's in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and all new construction and alterations in the public right-of-way must comply with the federal requirements, because we are the we have the jurisdiction in the right-of-way as the city. And then the acronym that we're using is PROAG, and that's an acronym for Public Rights-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. And PROAG was developed by the United States Access Board, and that's currently the industry best practice that was developed by a federal agency, and that's what our design standards are modeled after. And then just some more additional background. IRAB approved all the changes at their December meeting that we presented here last month, as well as we worked with the home builders, had several meetings with them on this, and especially the sidewalk width issue. And then we worked with a group of consulting engineers when we reviewed the design standards. And just kind of a quick summary of the accessible sidewalk standards. Basically, we removed there's the sidewalk design standards, which is about a half a paragraph, was in Chapter 8. It was accompanied with the street design and pavement thickness. And then what we ended up doing to make sure we're in compliance with the ADA and PROAG, we actually created a new Chapter 16, Accessible Sidewalk and Protruding Objects. And that was modeled after an Iowa specification that's used by a good share of the communities in Iowa. And the majority of this, we're not, for the most part, we're not creating anything new here. A lot of the requirements have been around since shortly after the ADA was passed. Items like cross slopes, ramp slopes, landing areas, a lot of the major components, that they've been around. We're just formalizing it, putting them into one document. Now there are some changes, and we went over those last time, and basically there's about 4 primary changes. One is our intersection design, and then dual curb ramps, we're moving toward them, as well as sidewalk width in the residential driveways, and then additional design detail that's going to be needed on the plans. And I just got a one-page slide for each of those changes. So on our intersection design, basically, we've always done a really good job of getting the pedestrian up to the curb and gutter. Now the next, if you want to say the evolution in PROAG and set of standards, is we have to make sure that we accommodate that pedestrian from a cross slope perspective across the street. So we have to start factoring in our street grades and stuff. So there's some of the requirements in there that our designer has to look at when they're doing the street design. They have to take not only vehicles into account, they have to take pedestrians. And the items in blue up there are kind of the areas that we're talking about on those crosswalk situations. One of the other items that we're moving toward is dual curb ramps. We're going to require these on most new installations. And this is actually a good example of, so something like this is going to take several years to fully move toward in a subdivision, because we have subdivisions out there right now that maybe have a single ramp, and maybe it's a vacant lot, and we're not going to be going back and tearing out corners to put in dual ramps if there's a single ramp there, if that makes sense. Or it might take a few years for some of those items to catch up with us, per se, with the design. One of the other items is we had a lot of discussion last time here on sidewalk width and passing areas. So one of the requirements in ADA is if our sidewalks are less than 5 foot wide, we have to have a passing area every 200 feet. Now, most of our collector streets and arterial streets are already 5 and 6 foot wide. So we're talking about the local residential streets that are 4 foot wide. And we had talked through some options for that. One was to move toward a 5 foot width, and we decided against that in cooperation with the home builders, so we don't have additional pavement out there. And what we decided to do is move toward a 5 foot wide driveway in those areas, which is basically a no-cost implementation strategy to get to our passing zone requirements. The other was more design detail is going to be needed by our designers. Again, we used to, the designers design the street first, and then the pedestrian access, the sidewalks, was kind of a secondary afterthought. And now we're going to require more information on our plans so that we know that the sidewalks will meet the current ADA guidelines. So they just have to do some more engineering on the upfront to, if you want to say, prove it out that the design will work, instead of just putting a standard plate in the plans and hoping that the grades work out. And then kind of a summary of the sidewalk ordinance changes that we had proposed. Again, we're clarifying the inspection requirements there. We're asking that any new sidewalk that's being installed, they need to contact us within 2 days of that being completed for us to do an inspection on it. We did inspections. We always had the right to do inspections. The contractors just haven't done a good job of calling in for those inspections, so we're kind of chasing ourselves to try and get those kind of after the fact. And a lot of times we're finding deficiencies several months after something takes place. So if somebody puts a sidewalk in wrong in a new home, and then all the landscaping's in, all the sods there, maybe the homeowners moved in. So all we're just asking for is that contractor to call us within a couple days so we can get out there and do that inspection. Clarified the permit requirements. One of the items there's kind of a little ambiguity. The ordinance requires a sidewalk and driveway permit, and we issue those when a homeowner's doing their own sidewalk or driveway. One area that wasn't very clear is if they pull a new home permit, about 1,000 of those a year, was the sidewalk and driveway approach installation covered under that. And all we're saying for this ordinance is, yes, that the sidewalk and driveway portion of the permit is covered under your home building permit. You don't have to get 2 permits. So that's just merely a clarification of how we've been doing business. And then we rearranged it for better flow. It just didn't flow very well. So now kind of the update items. I want to talk about the applicability, where these design standards really apply and who they apply to, and then some to address the HBA concerns, the implementation, communication, and education strategies. So as far as applicability, and I know we had a lot of discussion last time about the passing zone requirements. And one thing we want to be very clear on, the passing zone requirements apply to new construction or redevelopment only. It does not apply to maintenance projects such as a homeowner replacing a driveway or a few panels of sidewalk. Again, they're replacing their driveway per se, and maybe the sidewalk through the driveway. We're not going to make them rip out additional panels to do that work. Again, applying to new construction or redevelopment. And what I mean by redevelopment, again, say a convenience store comes in and they buy out 2-3 houses, it gets rezoned, and they're redeveloping that particular piece of property. We're going to make them be in full compliance with the accessibility standards. The other thing is, if a homeowner does replace his entire driveway or his entire sidewalk, then we would have that discussion with them about, hey, we would like you to comply with this. But again, maintenance type projects, no, you do not have to comply with that. And I'd give some other examples of where we would do that. Another example would be like your sanitary sewer service. There's a lot of old clay pipes out there, and a lot of times those need repairs. While our current design standards say it has to be a PVC pipe, that whole sewer service, we don't make a homeowner redo their entire sewer line to put it in PVC if they're just repairing a few feet of line. You know, in that case, they would just cut out the 4 feet of bad clay pipe, or that's just one example of where we would, how the applicability applies here. You know, what are some options here with the passing zone? So the direction we were moving with this is, instead of having these little 5-foot by 5-foot areas on these local residential streets, working on what the HBA recommended, we're going to go with a 5-foot driveway. So what happens, and it will happen, if they forget to put that 5-foot wide driveway in? Well, we go back to the intent of the ADA is to have a passing zone every 200 feet. At the end of the day, we don't really care how they attain that. So if they forget it through the driveway, they can come back and they can either add on to a piece of that sidewalk out there, or they can maybe remove one of the 4x4 panels that are out there and replace it 5-foot wide. Those are some options for us. Again, we don't want to be punitive. You know, for us, doing the driveway approach was more of a standardization, so we don't have haphazard, you know, where you have a 5-foot wide driveway and then you have, it would be nice as you're going down a corridor to have uniform 5-foot driveways, but especially in this transition period, we want to be very flexible with the property owners there. As far as implementation, community, and education strategies, just want to recap some of the discussion that we had with Todd, and I don't want to put any, I don't want to speak on behalf of the HBA, so I'll kind of defer to Todd on that, but I'll just recap what we discussed here. And we met with them on Wednesday, February 8th to talk about implementation, and then education and communication strategies. As far as an implementation component of it, we're recommending that we would, if we continue to move forward, that we would have an early spring implementation. If we would hold to the schedule, we could actually have the ordinance and design standards effective April 14th, would be about the earliest we could do it. Now, if that lags a couple weeks, that's all right too, but we would like to see this implemented so we can get all the contractors trained before construction season fully hits. So we're not doing like a mid-year change. And then this would be effective for any permits taken out after that date. So again, if you have an existing building permit, like the passing zone requirement, we're not going to hold you to that because it's not effective yet. The other thing is we're doing some education with the contractors right now also. We're trying to educate them on, hey, you need to call us for those inspections. So we've actually started that process last fall already. Going back to last September, we actually have had multiple communications with the contracting industry. Hey, you need to call us when you do this work so we can come and inspect it. The other thing is the first of this year, we actually, we are starting to pay more attention to an existing ordinance that we have of anytime a contractor does work in the right of way, they have to be insured and bonded, and that's to protect the city's interest. And what we found is a lot of contractors haven't been properly bonded and insured. So again, that's something else that we've been communicating to the contractors. So we'd kind of like this all to kind of flow seamlessly per se into one kind of mass training that would occur this spring so we can start out the season you know, moving in the right direction with this. As far as communication strategies, you know, again, spoke about already informing some of the contracting community, or a lot of the contracting community. A couple of those communications that we've sent out, we've already sent it out to 900 plus contractors, and that's either been letter or mostly emails that we would have on file. We would propose continuing to do that. Another communication to all the contractors that we have on file, again, via email or letter. And then probably the important thing is we want to make sure that an educational handout goes out to anybody pulling out a new home building permit. So if you come to the city, get a new building permit, we'd hand you a packet of information that would try and recap these new requirements and give some, I'll say, common sense approach on how to do some of these, how to install, and how to be compliant. So that's another one of our strategies that we want to work on or to implement. And then as far as training, we already have training scheduled with the HBA on April 18th, kind of a brown bag, almost like a lunch and learn type session that's scheduled at the Home Builders HBA's office, and just to talk through their contractors with the implementation with this. So with that, be glad to answer any questions.
Great, and I'll take direction from counselors as to whether you want to go directly into questions with Shannon, or would you like to hear from Todd first and then take?
I'd like to ask Shannon if you.
Okay, yes, go right ahead, Counselor Staley.
Oh, now Shannon, you did some mailing out to these, how would you say, 800 people?
About 900 for the emails, yep.
And so you're pretty sure you've caught all of them?
I wouldn't say that. What's really, the end user group is the concrete contractors, and they're probably one of the most difficult group of contractors to get a hold of, because it's very, basically if you're insured and bonded, you can basically call yourself a concrete contractor. You know, basically if you have a pickup and some shovels, and not trying to belittle that type of contractor, but it's not like a plumbing contractor where you need licenses or electrical, where it's just it's a different group. And that's why for us, like educating, handing out this informational packet to the general contractor, and that's why we're really putting a lot of the onus. The contractor who pulls the building permit, at the end of the day, it's his responsibility to make sure that his electrical subcontractor, his plumbing contractor, are all doing their job calling in for the inspections, because the general isn't going to get occupancy until all those other trades are being done. So for us to make sure, and we actually talked about that with the HBA, and I don't know if Todd wants to comment on that, but that was kind of one of the consensus, that a lot of this responsibility falls to the general contractor pulling that building permit.
And I feel really reassured in the fact that you're not going to be giving out any fines to people if somehow it gets done the wrong way, because we got this 5-foot sidewalk thing that we can implement, right?
Right.
The piece of so, and for the record, you and I just had this discussion, but I would like to submit that we have allow, instead of ripping out the 4-foot, that we would say you can keep the 4-foot in if indeed they don't get it done, leave the 4-foot and then add a foot on the side. And you said that could be a doable thing?
That would be an option.
Or a half a foot on each side, just so we wouldn't have to be doing a destructive thing to the existing panel, right?
And some of that would be up to the contractor also. You know, you got an aesthetic issue, you know,
Right,
does a
right.
person want that?
But they would have some flexibility then.
That would certainly be one way to accomplish that.
Okay, and then let me ask this: could I do my own concrete work in my, if I want to replace a sidewalk, can I do that myself?
I think I'll have Wes Phillips come up and answer that. He deals with a lot of these permits on a day-to-day basis.
I'm Wes Phillips from the engineering office. In general, the only time that a citizen is not or is allowed to do sidewalk without being insured and bonded is if it's their own property, and then they're allowed to do the sidewalk portion of that only. the portion that connects to the street, the driveway approach, would still need to be done by a licensed and insured and bonded contractor.
Okay. And then one more question for Shannon. Now, we were talking about driveways. If I I live in an older home and I have a short driveway. So I already have a drainage problem with it coming back in to my garage. So I'm going to redo my driveway. I have to have the 5-foot sidewalk area, right? I have to have I thought you said older driveways would, if you replace the whole driveway, you had to.
What we're saying is if you are redoing all your sidewalk, all your driveway, we would talk to you about it. If you're just replacing your driveway, we would not hold you to that 5-foot requirement.
Okay, so any pre-existing homeowner isn't going to have to worry about this.
Correct.
Good. Thank you.
And I'm going to, since it doesn't appear that we have any other questions right now from committee members, I'm going to ask the question for the 5-foot section through the driveway. That's to eliminate the seams that are created from the expansion joints, and so that wheels are not getting caught in those seams. Is that the thought process behind that?
Correct. And a lot of it has to do with the grades, because basically as you come off the street, you have a fairly steep approach, and then to meet the ADA, that's when it flattens out to that 2% cross slope. And typically, then your driveway between the sidewalk and your house goes up at a lot steeper grade again. So it's that making sure that we're 2% maximum for that entire 5-foot width is the reason for the 5-foot driveway.
Okay, so it's more about just the grade versus whether you have
Correct.
seams that wheels have to bump
Yeah,
up over and so forth.
You know, the whole passing zone, I would say it's going to be a learning experience for us this year. And I would venture to say that we'll probably be back to IRAB and probably before Land Use and Council, possibly within a year, maybe looking at tweaking this if we need to. Because we've actually already had several contractors approach us that have kind of heard that this is coming down the pipe and saying, hey, I don't want to do the 5-foot wide driveway. Can I just build a 5-foot wide sidewalk, one panel right next to the driveway? And our position right now is, yeah, that would be fine. Again, we were just trying to approach it from let's have a uniform way of doing this, and then without trying to get too into details, you know, we're trying to maintain, the requirement is every 200 feet. While generally the driveways are going to be less than 200 feet apart. If we start having people randomly putting these passing zones, maybe someone puts at the front of their lot or at the, let's say, the extreme east edge. Well, then the next homeowner puts it at the extreme west edge. Now we can maybe go more than that 200 feet. Is it going to be a huge issue? Probably not. But that's where we're just kind of looking for some of that uniformity. You know, in our case, if a contractor wants to pour a 5 by 5 foot piece outside the driveway area, we'd recommend that they install it right next to the driveway. So we don't have this, I'll call it this wide piece of sidewalk on the property line that would just kind of look out of place, and people are going to wonder, what are we doing here? So, and if, you know, at the end of the year, if there's a better way to do it, we're all for that. So.
Okay. Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, I think flexibility is great, so I'm glad to hear that. So in the newer subdivisions, like mine, like Westridge too, if you're familiar with that, way on the west side of town, let's say built in the last 10 years, you already have the dual curb ramps. Is anything really changing for those of us in newer subdivisions where they're already there, or is this really getting at redevelopments? Because most of these neighborhoods like mine, I already have the dual curb ramps at certain locations. Maybe not all of them. I guess I haven't sat and analyzed it, but.
That's interesting. Generally, the new subdivisions that we've been doing the last several years have single ramps.
Okay.
Don't have the dual ramps, so that would, now if you're when we go in and retro an area, for instance, when we're doing an overlay, we have to bring up those ADA corners. And I'll say typically, with the emphasis on typically, we would put back dual ramps has been our kind of standard process. Or if you're seeing a project the city is doing, maybe rebuilding a neighborhood project or an arterial street, you're probably going to see those dual type ramps on those. But typically, we haven't been requiring the dual ramps on those types of applications.
Okay, so in those cases where there's a single, if they do a major redevelopment, you would require the dual?
I would say a better way to say that is, if it's a single family lot, a corner lot, and there's a single opening now, we would, and there's no sidewalk there, the ramps aren't there yet, we would only require that home builder to put back a single ramp. Because otherwise, to make them go to the dual ramps, that home builder's going to have to hire somebody to tear out the curb and gutter and then put the dual ramps back, and it's going to be a significant expense. So that's when I was mentioning earlier about there'll be a transition period. So again, if there's a single ramp opening now, maybe that lot doesn't get built on for, could be 5 years in a subdivision. It could be 5 years that we still see single ramps installed in some cases. So it kind of starts with the new subdivision. When they put the curb and gutter down, we got to get it right at that point.
Okay, so most of that will hit the new development?
Yes.
Mostly, okay. And other than that, I would just be happy to hear from the home builders as to what their thoughts are.
Councilor Staley first.
Shannon, one more thing. When you were talking about intersection design, accounting for pedestrians all the way across the street, you're talking about Mark Cotter's department then, right? I mean, that isn't something that any kind of contractor has to worry about. Wasn't that the city's responsibility? Account for pedestrians all the way across the street, not just the sidewalk up to the street. I mean, anything dealing with the street is with the city.
Generally, yes, but we have authority or jurisdiction. So let me back up here. In a new subdivision, the private developer hires an engineer who has to meet our design standards, and then the developer would hire a contractor to install the infrastructure, and then they turn it over to the city. We make sure that they're doing it right according to the requirements. So the developer's engineer generally is the one that would have to make sure that the intersection is working from a grade standpoint, and it is the developer's contractor that has to install it right. For instance, if it's a 2% maximum grade that's designed on the plans and the contractor does not install that right, they are required to fix that.
So how does that apply to just existing, like, older neighborhoods? Is that what's the standard there?
So the intersection design generally applies to new subdivisions and reconstructed streets. If we go in to the older neighborhoods when we're doing an overlay or something, in most cases, if we don't meet ADA from a street crossing perspective, now it's, I don't want to say impossible because nothing's impossible, but it's very,
expensive.
The chances of getting it, yeah, right. And the ADA doesn't expect us to rip out, if we're just doing the corner, they don't expect us to rip out a half a block of street just so we can get the grades right. That would be a technical infeasibility.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
But the feds are they're a lot less, on new construction, the standards are a lot higher.
Okay, great. And I think, seeing no further questions for you, Shannon, I'll invite Mr. Anowski up to address the council. If you would please identify yourself, too.
Good afternoon, Land Use Committee members. Todd Anowski, Government Affairs Director with the Home Builders Association here in Sioux Falls. I don't really have anything new to add from what Shannon said. Again, we appreciated the opportunity to visit with Shannon and his team regarding this issue. I think we met earlier this fall regarding this issue and ADA compliance issues for the city. And I would just echo that, again, this is going to be a new learning experience for builders to be in compliance with the 5-foot side walking 5-foot passing zone. And, you know, we built over 1,000 new homes last year, single-family, twin homes. I don't know if 100% of the people will be in full compliance with this when if it rolls out in April. But I think the key is the city has said there's some flexibility there. So if a contractor or builder was not able to, for whatever reason, incorporate that 5-foot passing zone in the driveway, at least they would have an option with a sidewalk panel to include that. So again, I think that's a good thing, and like Shannon said, it's a learning experience, and so maybe after the building season is complete this fall, maybe we can relook at the issue, and maybe we, through those discussions, maybe the best approach isn't having that 5-foot passing zone in the driveway. Maybe it is a separate 5-foot panel in the sidewalk area. So we'd certainly be open to that, but again, appreciate the opportunity to provide those comments.
Councilor Neisser.
Were you feeling okay with the timeline of implementation?
You know, we're coming upon the construction season, and so I think my previous comments to some of you were, as long as we can get our message out there and have the educational classes with our builders, if the city can provide some type of notice when a building permit is taken out, will that be a complete 100% guarantee? Maybe not, but at least we're striving and we're trying to be proactive to address that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Todd, what percentage of builders are members of your association?
I don't have an exact figure, but as far as membership in the Home Builders Association, we have 1,000 plus members. Some of those are builder contractor members. Other members are associate members and affiliates, and roughly we'd probably have 250 to 300 members as builder members of our association.
Okay, so the city engineering department working collaboratively with the Home Builders Association certainly helps in getting that message out to the contractors. And just to clarify, you have basically a general contractor for a home, and then he or she would sub out the sidewalk driveway work to somebody else, and so that it would be up to that general home contractor then to convey the specifications. Is that correct? As well as the concrete contractor?
Yes, as I understand it, and maybe one other comment on that particular issue. If you're the contractor or builder and you're having multiple projects, sometimes you may need some flexibility when choosing, say, your concrete contractor. And so again, things may change. I may put down on that application I'm using ABC concrete, but I may need to change that given certain situations. And so we would maybe ask for a little bit of flexibility, or make it somewhat easy if there is a change where I need to change that concrete contractor, that I can do so and still be in compliance with the city rules and regulations.
Okay. Councilor Staley?
I've got a question. Would it be helpful if a brochure was made up and maybe given out to some of these concrete companies? I mean, because anybody who's pouring concrete is going to have to go to, how many of them are there in town?
I can't tell you that offhand, but
Well, there's at least one.
Yeah.
Right there. I mean, wouldn't you think it would be helpful just to go to the source of where these people are going to be actually picking up the materials? And or a journal that you put out. I mean, you're going to let your members know, but word of mouth actually would help as well. I was even thinking maybe the water bill, but maybe that would be confusing if we put something out to the whole public. Would you think? I mean, that since it's not applying to existing residences.
Yeah, if there'd be a way where, and I'm just speaking out loud here, and thinking out loud, if your association, the city engineering department could still, or continue to work collaboratively in an effort to get this information out. And it seems to me that Director Cotter had mentioned the development of some new information for permitting and permits and processes and things. Or did I misinterpret that? Shannon, could you come up and address that?
Yes, I can't necessarily speak to that, but as far as a brochure, so when I indicated that we want to, when a contractor comes in for a new building permit, that's when we want to, I'll call it an informational packet. I think right now it's a little more, it needs to be a little more detailed than a brochure per se, but there'll be we need to develop that yet in the next few weeks to figure out how do we simplify a lot of information but yet get the adequate information out there, because we have a whole bunch of standard plates that go with this as far as design details on how to construct the driveway, more specific details, hoping to maybe come up with some like color-coded shading, hey, when you're building a new driveway, make sure this red part is 5 foot wide, something along those lines, that maybe try and have a blending of technical engineering details into something more user-friendly.
But would you be seeing, is every person doing some concrete work going to be coming into to get the building permit?
No.
So like, if you had just some notification at Schoenemann's, or, where builders gather and people are in that business to say, there's a change in concrete construction for new driveways, just to alert people, I don't think that would be a bad thing.
Well, I would say in general, the information packet that we want to develop for the general contractor would be the same packet for any, it'd be a packet we can give to any contractor.
When they come to you?
Or if we see them through training, like we pack this informational for the training, and that would kind of be our standard. We'd probably link to it on our website even, so a variety of ways to try and get that information out.
Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, and one more thing, Shannon. I don't want to belabor it, because we're never going to reach 100% of the public on on any group on anything. You try to reach as many as you can. So, you sort of answered the question. So just for my education, if I'm a home builder and I subcontract all of the concrete work, the concrete guy doesn't walk in off the street and show you, here's my plans, this is where the sidewalk's going to be, and you don't do like a whole review of looking at where it's at, or is it just as simple as I call up Joe, the concrete guy, and say, put in the driveway?
Well, the development plans would indicate where the sidewalk's supposed to be installed.
Okay.
So that information, now whether the general contractor is conveying that information to the subcontractor, that's between the general and the sub.
But really, the communication that you have is with the general who's pulling the permit to build the entire house, and includes where the sidewalk's going to be.
That would be our first.
So that's your line of defense, is getting it to him, and then he gets it to the next.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if the general hires a sub who isn't insured and bonded, and then we go out there to do an inspection, come to find out they're not insured and bonded, we're going to try and first work with that sub to get them the appropriate bonding and stuff. But if they don't have it, and if they didn't meet the requirements, we're going to go back to that general permit holder, since he has the overall permit.
Okay, thank you.
And I will say, I'll just make this note. The passing zone, I'm not real concerned about. We'll work with the contractors on that. I am concerned about, we are stepping up our enforcement, per se, of the 2% cross slope. We actually did a sampling of about 30 new homes last year, and we went and measured the cross slope, and over half of them were out of compliance. They exceeded the 2%, and that is such a clear-cut requirement at the federal level. There's no flexibility on that, and that's what we've actually been, if you want to say hammering on, we've been communicating in multiple letters with the contracting community. Don't set your forms to 2%. Set them at 1.5. Give yourself a little flexibility. We will have instances this summer where contractors do not pour that cross slope right, and they have to remove and replace it. If they do that through the driveway, they'll probably have to take out part of the driveway to get those slopes right. So that's something that, again, we don't take any pleasure in making a contractor rip stuff out, but they will have to correct some issues this summer.
One other quick question for you, Shannon, too. Is that also for the protection of the homeowner then, too? Because if the work is done and it wasn't done properly and that slope was too great and somebody comes along during icy conditions, slips and falls,
Yep, I would say
what kind of
somewhat
liability
homeowner,
does
but I'd
homeowner?
actually put that more on, it's a protection of the taxpayer and the city, because again, the federal, and Colleen can maybe speak to this better than I can, but again, we're required to make sure infrastructure, sidewalks in the public right-of-way, we're the governing agency on that. So if the feds would come in and say, hey, that sidewalk didn't get installed right in that home, they don't care about what the home builder or the homeowner did. They're going to say, city, you should have put this in right. City, you got to fix it. We don't care how you do it. Then that puts us in a situation where we either we'd fix it on the taxpayer's dime.
Okay, great. Thank you. And this, again, this is all in an effort just to be in compliance with with Disabilities Act, and these are standards that have been placed at the federal level that we do have a requirement to follow those standards. So I appreciate you working with all the stakeholders involved and trying to incorporate this in a as friendly fashion as possible. So thank you very much, Todd and Shannon, for working together, and Wes and Colleen as well, too. Okay, we're now moving to open discussion. Any comments for open discussion? Seeing and hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.